Okay, I'm gonna record a video and I'm gonna do it in one take. And this is really horrifying and nerve-wracking for me. So feel free to make fun of me when I'm done with this. Today we're talking about Kennedy's foreign policy. So as you know, JFK comes into office in 1961. He won the election of 1960 against Richard Nixon. We're going to talk about what he did to address the Cold War, which was in full swing by the time he became president. While you are watching this, you can fill out number 1 to 4 in your study guide. So that's handy. Sorry, I'm really awkward. We're just going to keep going. So in 1961, JFK becomes president. As I said, the US and Soviet relations are super unstable at that time. We're picking up where we left off. The US and the Soviets are still not enjoying each other's company. So JFK continues the anti-communist foreign policy from the Truman and Eisenhower administrations. So you remember containment, this idea of stopping communism spread from other countries. But JFK alters it a little bit. So he, oh my God, I hate watching myself talk. I'm so sorry. He comes up with two ideas, that are part of his response to the Cold War. These are flexible response and foreign aid, and they'll look really similar to stuff that we've already talked about, but they've got a little JFK twist. So the first one is flexible response. And so this is going to look a lot like, actually, no, sorry, forgot what I just said. This is going to look different. So in certain parts of the world, communist groups were fighting to take control of their nation's governments, usually with help from the Soviet Union. And a lot of them were using guerrilla warfare tactics. So guerrilla warfare, if you don't know, is it's not like the classic form of warfare where two big companies of soldiers just attack each other head on. This is more snipers, hiding in trees. It's really, really hard to take down. And we're going to learn a lot more about this when we get into Vietnam. But first we got to do this. So Kennedy's looking at this and he's like, we need a flexible response. We need a way to address these issues, address these, communist guerrillas, but a way that actually addresses the problem and isn't just the same thing we've been doing over and over again. So JFK, he wants to improve the US's ability to respond to new kinds of threats abroad. So he comes up with what's called flexible response, which is to provide help to nations fighting against communists. And what he does is he sends in specially trained military units. So we know these as the Special Forces or the Green Berets. They're super highly trained soldiers who go in and can help fight against guerrilla warfare tactics. Another thing that he did, which is going to look familiar to the Marshall Plan, is Kennedy realized also that if a country was poor, it was more likely to turn to communism, because communism's whole thing was economic equality. Equality sounds great when you're really poor. So in order to weaken the appeal of communism, JFK starts giving aid to poor countries. So it seems pretty easy. If all these poor countries are really vulnerable to falling to communism, let's give them some money. Let's give them some stuff. And so the Alliance for Progress brought economic growth to Latin America. This was really helpful in Latin America. Another thing that started as a way to battle communism was the Peace Corps. So Ms. Matzner did this. You can talk to her about it. Sorry, I'm grabbing water because my mouth is dry. So this was sending in young volunteers into often very poor countries so that they could serve as teachers, healthcare workers, assist with farming, assist with government, anything that country needed. And so this, it's a really great thing and a really wonderful experience, but it started as a way to combat communism. Wow, these go a lot faster when I don't have to stop to wait for you guys to stop talking. This rules. So meanwhile, things are shaking up in Cuba. In 1959, this guy pictured here, Fidel Castro, he seizes power in Cuba and he sets up a communist dictatorship that exists to this day. I think it's Fidel's brother that is currently in power in Cuba. Cuba became an ally of the Soviet Union, quite obviously. And the United States immediately starts planning ways to overthrow Castro. And so this is during the Eisenhower administration back in 1959. Remember, Kennedy does not become president until 1961. He gets elected in 1960. And so they're thinking about ways to overthrow the Castro administration, overthrow Castro in Cuba, but without making it look like the United States actually did it. And so they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to get rid of Castro, but they don't want to get blamed for getting rid of Castro. So what they do is they recruit these Cuban exiles, so people who had been forced to flee from Castro's Cuba, and basically train them up by the CIA. The CIA trains them and then sends them into Cuba to basically start a rebellion. And the hope was that other Cubans would join in this rebellion. So Eisenhower never gets to do this while he's president, but the plan falls to Kennedy. But first, I just want to show you this map of Cuba and the United States. So it's a really big deal that Cuba is a communist country because you can see how close it is to the United States. At its closest part, Cuba is only 90 miles away from the United States. So even though Cuba is this tiny little island country, it's a really big deal. They're super close to us. So thanks, guys. So Kennedy basically goes forward with Eisenhower's plan. He hears about it. He's like, that sounds good. He doesn't really question it. So on April 17th, 1961, so like 3 months after Kennedy becomes president, 1,500 Cuban exiles land at the Bay of Pigs, which is a bay in Cuba, and things go really badly. They're outnumbered. They can't do what they're supposed to do. They're looking to the United States for air support, but Kennedy, again, remember, doesn't want it to seem like he actually did this, so he's staying out of it, and the Cubans totally crushed the invasion. It just went totally awry. So this is a huge, huge embarrassment for Kennedy. JFK ended up losing trust in the CIA. The whole of Latin America ended up losing trust in JFK, and then also the Soviet leader Khrushchev ended up thinking that JFK was really weak. So this was a pretty bad way to start out his presidency in terms of foreign policy. The next big thing that happens is the building of the Berlin Wall, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. So in 1961, this is when Kennedy becomes president, Germany is still divided into 2 sections. Remember, we talked about this at the end of World War II. Germany is still divided into 2 sections 16 years later. West Germany is an ally of the United States, but East Germany is controlled by the Soviet Union. This is an issue because within East Germany is the city of Berlin. So Berlin is in East Germany, and Berlin inside East Germany is split. The next slide is a map so you can visualize this. And American and British and French forces are still in the western part of the city. And this is really irritating the Soviets. Plus, another thing that's irritating the Soviets is that people from East Germany aren't super happy with communism. Remember, East Germany is controlled by the Soviet Union, so it's communist. A lot of them are not super happy with how communism is working out, and they're really poor. And so a lot of them are fleeing into East Berlin to get away from the communist regime. And so that is rightly angering the Soviet Union. So here, let's take a look at the map. You can see West Germany is the dark green, East Germany is the light green, but then within East Germany is the city of Berlin, which is also split like the whole country of Germany. Why they did this, again, is beyond me. And as we'll see with the Vietnam War, splitting countries into 2 sides doesn't work. We saw it once with the Korean War. We're seeing it with Germany. We're going to see it again with Vietnam. So in June of 1961, so we're again like 6 months into Kennedy's presidency, Khrushchev, the Soviet leader, he tells JFK to move his troops out of West Berlin. Kennedy says no, and to really double down on that no, he sends in more troops. So really angers Khrushchev and the Soviets and the East German government. So in the summer of 1961, another thing that angers the German government happens. A lot of East Germans flee into West Berlin, like a huge wave of them. And so the Soviets decide they really need to crack down. So in August of 1961, the East German government, with Soviet backing, closes the border between East Berlin and West Berlin. And so in closing the border, they build concrete walls, they put up barbed wire, they set up armed guards to stop the East Germans from crossing into West Berlin. And this effectively cuts down communication between the two cities. So basically now Berlin is two cities. It's East Berlin and West Berlin, and they are completely cut off from each other in every way that you can imagine. And this is wild because there are people who have family on the other side of the wall who they don't get to see or talk to anymore. And so this is a really crazy thing. And so the wall becomes this symbol of the power of communism, of the kind of crushing power of communism. So the Allies stayed in West Berlin, but they couldn't stop the wall from getting built. So the wall gets built. If you go to Berlin one day when we're allowed to travel again, you can see parts of the wall. It got torn down in the 80s, but you can see parts of the wall. It's still pretty cool. There's a lot of kind of anti-government graffiti on it. It's cool. But here is a picture of the building of the wall. So you can see it basically just cuts neighborhoods in half. It's really kind of wild. So that is all I have for you today. Make sure that you fill out number 1 to 4 on your study guide. And you guys are going to start reading your Steve Schenken book today. Up to page 64 will be due on Friday. So cool. This was super weird. I'm going to stop talking now. Bye, guys.